Welcome. I will also mute the speaker right now. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. This is one of our usual webinars on sustainability and fundraising. This webinar is a collaboration between On Think Tanks, the Think Tank Initiative, and the Latin American Network of Think Tanks, ILAIP. And in this webinar, we have a chance to listen to a very good friend, Chukwuka Onyekwena, who's the Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Economies of Africa, CSEA, in Nigeria. And Chukwuka is going to present what I think is a very interesting and innovative fundraising strategy. And what's more interesting, it's an evidence-based fundraising strategy. They've faced similar challenges as other organizations across the world, and they've got themselves thinking about it and decided to apply their own research skills to develop the strategy themselves. I have shared in the chat, and you can also find this on the On Think Tank site, the document itself, the strategy document, which we have edited as a best practice, and also an interview I did with Chukwuka earlier in the year in April when we met in Accra. So if you want a little bit more background on the story, you can get it directly from him and his team. Okay, so the way this is going to work, we have about an hour. Chukwuka is going to present for about 15-20 minutes tops the strategy. I will be sharing the slides just to make sure that we get the connection working properly. And then Julie Lefrance from TTI will join in with a few questions and comments. And then Jorge Enriquez from FOSTE in Latin America will join in also with a few questions and comments and a reflection on how this African strategy might be applied to Latin America. Then we'll open this to any of you who are present for any further questions and comments. This will be recorded. I'm recording this, and we'll be sharing it with a broader audience. So if you didn't get a chance to see everything now, or you didn't get a chance to sign up, you can watch it later. Okay, so this is it from me. Chukwuka, your turn. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Just to confirm if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can.
Right, great. Okay, so my name is, as Enrique said, my name is Chukwuka Onyekwena, but the short form is Chukwuka, and I'm here today to present. The title of my presentation is Towards Innovative Fundraising Strategies for Think Tanks. Just to give a bit of a background about how this came up. This was originally an internal document in CC, and then we designed, myself and my colleagues, we came together and put up a strategy that we presented to our board members, and the board members thought it was, they made some positive remarks on it, and from my engagement with Enrique, I decided to, to also share it with other think tanks. So it's quite particular to our organization, but I've now developed it as an article that any think tank could, possibly benefit from. So to start the presentation, the outline, move back. Outline. So I'll start with the background.
Chukwuka, do you mind turning on the video?
Move to.
Sorry to interrupt.
Phase 1, which is targeting. The phase 2, implementing. Oh, turning off the video. Okay.
Yes, because I think the connection is not very good.
So I've done that, and I'm moving to, because this is quite secret. So there's a targeting phase, there's an implementation phase, and then there's the monitoring and evaluation and learning phase. So that's how my presentation is arranged. So the next slide. So a bit of a background. We are all aware that there's some form of a changing landscape, whereby think tanks and research institutions in general are finding it harder to generate revenue, which questions, which raises concerns about their sustainability and long-term prospects. There's a lot of drivers for these. Some is more general and some is more specific to regions. But one general one is that there is a form of a mismatch. So there's a trend whereby policymakers are becoming less interested in long and formal research type outputs, while think tanks have not really adjusted and still provide, they have not really adjusted to provide short and conversational outputs to meet the demand. So it's like a mismatch. And then, regions like Africa, there are demand issues and issues. So in view of these issues, myself and my colleagues, we sat down together and developed this 3-phase and fairly systematic fundraising strategy. Next slide, please. So we try to categorize
Chukwuka, sorry, the connection is very bad. We can hear you.
Demand side and supply side.
Okay.
And one is
Chukwuka, can you hear me? Sorry, I think we need
less demand for the typical. You can hear me? Can you hear me now? I'm screaming. Can you hear me? I can hear you, Henry. Can you hear me, Enrique? Hello? Now I'll stop hearing you.
Hello?
Hello, I can hear you now.
Yes, it's just a connection. Yes, it's just your connection that is slow. So if you can, I'll just let you know when it cuts off. I'm sorry about this to everybody else, but it's a reality of communications across regions.
Please wait. Whenever you stop hearing me, please.
I'll send you a private chat. Yes.
Exactly. So I'll know.
Okay.
I can. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Keep going.
So where am I? There's the demand side and there's the supply side. So the policymakers, which are the ultimate targets for think tanks, are demanding less of the typical research outputs that think tanks produce. And there is a movement towards that. Demand is moving towards informal, shorter outputs, probably not produced by think tanks. So there is the supply side issue where there is think tanks are lagging behind the trend of innovative communication strategies to meet the demand, particularly at the policy and policy space. So, and there's also increasing doubts on the objectivity of the outputs of think tanks. And a key driver of this is the fact that because there is now scarcity of more flexible and competition, more flexible funding opportunities and competition for grants, think tanks tend to struggle to get funding, and in some cases it compromises their objectivity. So it also has increased and led to some questions about the objectivity of the output. So those are the challenges we identified. Next slide, please. So the first stage of this process is the identification and matching. So we have a list of donors that we've worked with in the past, the current one, and then the prospective ones. So we gathered them all of them, enumerated them, and we use a spreadsheet for this, and then group them based on the common thematic areas to our organization. So we're looking out for intersections. So, for example, this one does macroeconomic management as well as public finance management, and then we rank them according to the donors that have the highest areas of intersection with CSEA organization. So that was the first stage, and if you can see the illustration, next slide. So the next slide is simple, foundation ABC, foundation DEF, represents different founders or donors, if you call them, and then we've listed a few of the thematic areas of think tanks, and just the frequencies of the match areas that intersect with the areas of the donors that they work on that intersect with that of CC. The frequencies, when us to do the initial ranking. So you can see that XYZ is ranked first because they intersect with 4 areas, while and DEF is the second because it's 2. So that's just a simple ranking process based on intersections and the frequency of the intersections. Next slide, please. And then within that phase 1 as well, the targeting process also involves some coding. So we wanted to use some numerical way to code donors based on a specific criteria. So we graded the funders on based on the existing relationship, and their priorities. So we developed some criteria, and mind you, this criteria is quite particular to CC. So we thought that what determines the possibility of getting funding from donors is 1, the relationship with board members. So what I mean by that is if our board members have a relationship with their board members or their, the head of the institute, that can do some connections and say, hey, I think tank, it's a potential collaborator. And then 2 is the number of previous or ongoing engagements. So it's more likely that think tanks you worked with before, as donors you worked with before, are likely to also engage you for future work. And then the size of grants, and then the frequency of calls. So this is a criteria that we want to use to prioritize the think tanks on the previous list that we compiled. And then it's important to note that the selection criteria is quite specific to CC. And what I mean by that is that another think tank might have some other selection criteria to select the list of think tanks enumerated. So next slide. And then you can see that what I mean by coding is that if you see the first column, I put on all those criteria, and then I scale them. So it's a form of calibration from 0 to 5, so that, if there is no board member that has a contact with a donor, it's 0. If it's a 1 board member, it's 1. If it's 2, it's 2. The same with previous and ongoing projects. So if you had 1 project in the past, it's 1. If you have 2, 3, and so on, we just calibrate them in that way. And then the size of grants, we we have categories like from $1K to $50K as one, and then the 2 is from 51,000 to 100,000, and then above 500,000 is 5. And frequency of calls, some donors have called for proposals quite frequently, and then we also scale them according to how frequent they are. This is just it's a process. It's in view of the prioritization that we're trying to do. That is the basis of this. So this is just the stage 2 of the process in targeting. Next slide. So what we do is that, so we've calibrated these selection criteria. The next is to apply weights to them. What is more important? Is size of grant more important than relationship with board member, or is frequency of call more important than the other? So we apply weights, and the weights is just based on our experience in CSEA of what matters more. We apply those weights to those calibrated criteria in order to provide some kind of rank. And then, as I mentioned before, these weights are quite specific to CSEA. So next slide. So this illustrates this weighting process. So we think within CSEA that links, if we leverage on the networks of our board members, that it has more weight than responding to or engaging with previous donors. And the third in the rank is the size of the grant, and then the frequency of calls. So we apply these weights to the criteria that the coding that we've done in the past, and it's just a simple arithmetic by multiplying the fraction by the scale that we have chosen earlier, and then if you total it, you see that the one that has the highest, will be prioritizable. So foundation XYZ is the first because it has 2.5, while foundation GHY is the second because it has 1.6, which is second highest. So this phase is essentially, to rank, these donors, in order to prioritize our targeting, so that we know after when we enumerated all these donors and apply this, in our CE from maybe the top 20 or the top 10 donors to target, and this helped us to get to that. And so the next phase, next slide please. The next phase was now the implementation. Now we've seen the donors to target. How do we transform our processes in order to successfully engage with these donors to ensure positive outcomes? One is that we took time to study the policy research ecosystem, which I've just pointed out as consisting of government officials and policymakers, donors, and think tanks. This is a simple model because there are other players, but we have to simplify this for the benefit of this fundraising strategy that we're doing. And we try to, bring some understanding into how they interact and the roles they play, so that we say that donors fund public projects and programs as well as research and dissemination activities of think tanks, while think tanks produce and disseminate this research output to the government and policymakers, for evidence-based policymakers. So it's like a summary of the roles they play and how they interact, which I elaborated in the article. Next slide. So we took a two-pronged strategy towards implementation. One, we decided to close the information gap and also to stimulate demand for evidence. So in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria, we think that there's an information gap. And the gap is that we don't know what is going on in the donor environment as well as the policy makers environment. So how do we get the info? Because these are the two key key actors that we're interested in. So how do we align our operational strategies to monitor what's going there? So we had to develop two publications, policy updates, which provides a review of the provides what's going on in the policy space. This is not right. And the donor community review, which documents the recent activities of donors in the region. So it's just a regular update that monitors the policy space as well as the donor community, what they're doing. Like in the donor community, they call for proposals, upcoming events, resource guidelines. So we institutionalize the process by producing this these two publications on a bi-monthly basis. Next slide, please. And then, as part of this implementation, we had to do, shift from what we were using before, what we were applying before, which is an output-based strategy, to an issue-based strategy. And I'll explain what that means. So in the past, we were more concerned in producing output that aligns with our value proposition and thematic areas, and also competence, areas of competence. However, we now move to an issue-based strategy, which is more time-driven, so that as issues in the policy space changes, we align our research, our communications, to align with these changes, and it's a more timely, and it adjusts to time. So, for instance, if the issue is Nigeria opting out of the Continental Free Trade Area, we will be producing, we will adapt our research. We think that what will respond most to this issue is an opinion piece, or to organize a policy dialogue to discuss the issue of the opting out of the free trade area. While if the issue is like immigration, it might involve producing some podcasts, interviewing some key actors, and then producing some policy briefs. So our research and publications and engagement strategy and dissemination is aligned to the issues that evolve. So it is a more such as demand driven, is the policy driven kind of strategy. Next, please. And then we, like I said, we apply this to the three core areas in CC, in the research and policy engagement and communications too. So it's involved addressing topical issues in a timely fashion and short length, because of the trend and the trend in policymakers demanding more short length pieces rather than our usual or conventional working papers and project reports that we normally put on the website. So that's next please. And then we had to also align our policy engagement strategy to meet with the issue-based approach, which means that we have to engage policymakers differently. Like we acknowledge that there are differences in the way policymakers consume information, so that if we categorize these policymakers and align our strategy to meet their demands based on our assessment. Then within the communications, we have to change our communicate. We have to adjust our communication tools to meet that issue-based strategy, such as so our website, which was more stagnant, which was essentially highlighting more of our research areas, and we had to change it to a more interactive and frequently changing website where we highlight the issue in the policy space. We highlight the publications that we've produced to respond to the contemporary issue in the policy space. So it involved a transformation of processes to meet this issue-based approach. Next, please. And then this also, to ensure that we are doing the right thing, we have to really institutionalize a monitoring and evaluation and learning strategy to monitor how these processes aid the fundraising that was the ultimate aim. And in doing that, we had to monitor the success of we had to develop some indicators that monitor these processes, which I have listed here. And but this is still still developing. We have not really strengthened this monitoring and evaluation and learning strategy. So I'm concluding now. In the next slide. So in conclusion, this fundraising strategy has been adapted to the operating environment, and implementation strategies reflect the experiences in the region. So these are, this was born out of the need to systemize the process towards fundraising, and the rationale behind the study was to essentially provide a fairly systematic approach to guide fundraising endeavors of think tanks in general, and it was used specifically for CSEA. Thank you for your attention. Next slide.
Thank you, Chuka. Thank you very much for that. It strikes me that as our presentation last month, thinking about funding, you didn't just change the way you approach funders, but you also changed the kind of research you do, the subjects you deal with, the communication of your work. So it's not an intervention that can be planned and delivered in isolation of other aspects of the organization. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask Julie Lefrance from the Think Tank Initiative to offer a few comments or questions. Julie?
Great, thanks very much, Enrique, and thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Chuka. I had been familiar with a lot of the efforts and certainly the resource mobilization strategy that CSEA had developed, but I wasn't aware of some of the mechanics and the systematization of evidence that had been collected in order to inform that strategy. So I really appreciated even seeing that matrix. I think that really lays it out nicely in terms of how you were able to weight different criteria and do a real assessment of the policy landscape, both to identify the information gaps as well as where the demand was, and then how to enhance the demand for evidence with different stakeholders. A couple questions I have, I guess, maybe are less about the process of developing this system, which I think others could certainly learn from, and more about how you use different actors to actually undertake the implementation once you had this framework and this evidence and the plan established. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that the CC board had been quite involved in approving and providing some strategic guidance on the development of this resource mobilization plan. I'm just wondering, once you had done the evidence gathering and come up with that evidence map, to what extent were your board members, or to what extent do they continue to be engaged in helping you actually implement that plan and pursue conversations with different actors and raise the demand for evidence? Do you feel, because board engagement, of course, is something that we've talked about a lot, certainly in Africa, over the course of the business models action learning process that's just wrapped up recently. And I was just wondering whether you've seen a change in the way your board members have engaged and provided not just that strategic support, but actually leveraging their networks, making connections, promoting the use of evidence, promoting CC's work, and actually opening doors for CC in the fundraising. I'm not sure. I had Chukwuka, if you can hear me, I think you're on mute there. And then maybe I'll just throw my second question into the mix, and you can address them both, and then we can hear from others. And then the other question is, in your presentation, I guess you didn't really get into segmenting. You spoke quite a bit about demand from government. But I was just curious, because I know CC has had, at different points, an active strategy to try and engage the private sector. And I was just wondering if this exercise and surfacing where the information gaps were has surfaced any new intelligence around how CC could approach the private sector and look to have the private sector actually come to CC for commission work or consultancy work around various issues that CC is an expert on.
Okay. Should I answer these ones now, or should I wait for others?
No, go ahead. Chukwuka.
All right. So the first one is about the board, asking, how have the board, have they changed their approach towards supporting a CCA in light of this fundraising strategy? So let me just give you a background. The fundraising strategy was driven by myself, and and then I involved my colleagues. However, there was a board meeting coming up, and I decided to share this fundraising strategy with them, and they liked it. But in terms of the implementation, they are not quite involved in every aspect of it. But the part that they are involved in is in the resource mobilization, is to help to introduce the center to potential funders. That that has changed. That has improved significantly. Partly because of some, reforms or particular changes that we have done in our board. The members have changed. The size of the board have also increased, and this was just something to guide them towards to make them understand, the donors to prioritize. And the essence of leveraging on their networks, because they've seen from there that I weighted board relationship with board member high, and it points to the relevance I attach to to them pushing a center, towards donors that can raise substantial funds. So the second question is your curiosity about if these also captures the private sector. For the purposes of this article or strategy, I limited it to policymakers and donors, international NGOs mostly. Just like every model, we have to simplify it to and specify the scope. It could be extended to private sector quite easily. It's not something I've done within the scope of this work, but I can also do that. But I must tell you that in Nigeria, the period that I developed this, the private sector, because of the recession, was constrained in terms of even surviving us. So there are some existential challenges. So that also made me not to really consider them as potential funders. It's changing a bit now, so it will be worth looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuka. Julie, do you have any more questions, or should I pass it on to Jorge?
No, that's great. I'll be really curious to see how Jorge thinks this can be customized and applied to the Latin American situation.
Great, thank you. Jorge Enriquez works at Foster, a think tank in Latin America, and Jorge has been working over the last year or more looking at Foster's fundraising strategy or business development strategy. So I'm sure you'll have lots of things to think about. Do you have any questions or comments?
For this opportunity, and thank you, Chuka, for sharing your CSEA strategy. It's been interesting that you mentioned a lot of points that are in some way common to Latin America experience on fundraising. I do have the first question I do have to you, Chuka, is how manage the government funding, if you have any experience, and how does affect or have any conflict of interest because of the topic issues and the research. Is the first one. And the second is how does support, if there is, are affecting the independence of your organizations?
Hello. So first question is conflict of interest from what? From the government? Is that what you said?
Oh.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you cannot hear me.
Can you? I can hear you. So what I'm trying to get your questions rightly. You mentioned a conflict of interest with government funding.
Oh, okay. If you make a research, if you get some fund from the government, and those research sometimes can cross conflict of interest. Do you have any experience on that?
Oh, okay. That's conflict of interest. Okay, so let me answer that one first. So we operate, for some reason, CC's experience with the government in terms of funding has not quite been successful. What I mean successful is that we don't get any much funds. I don't think we've ever gotten any funds from the government, but in just one case, from an advisor that gave us some work to do. But in any case, we have a well defined objectivity clause in all our dealings with the government. That's if we are involving you, and even if you are funding our organization, we will look at things from an objective lens. So if we get funding from the government, it will not lead to conflict of interest. But that's a good point, because it's an issue that think tanks face when they get government funding. And if you remember the point I mentioned in the earlier slides, that because the quest to get more funding and the competition has made think tanks kind of compromise their objectivity in trying to align with their funders' interests. So it takes a lot of transparency and discipline to maintain objectivity, while you're broadening your funding base. So that's my answer to that. I think you have a second question. If you don't mind, can you repeat it?
The second question was related to the independence of your work, but it's closely related with the first one. But I have another. I have another one. I have to take the chance to ask, how is your organization managed when some of the members of the board, in our case, our organizations, are competing with the same grants? I'm saying that our organization is a network.
Okay.
And then we have, in some cases, our members are competing with the same grants as we are doing as FOSDE. How can we manage that in terms of the board?
Okay. All right. Let me answer your questions. One is the independence of our work. We are truly independent, like I mentioned. We really push for objectivity in what we do and not try to be, influenced by our funders. Recently, we had a project that the funder wanted us to push for the depreciation of Nigeria's currency to make our exports competitive, and we had to bring out a case that we cannot really express. We cannot really, put that in our publication and in the report, even though that they are funding it, because it's against our objective judgmental work to do. So we really push towards objectivity in our work. Then you asked also, how does your organization deal with members of the board competing for the same grant? That is a very good question, because in a recent workshop in Tanzania, some think tank from, I think, one of the Eastern African asked exactly the same question. That they have a situation where the board members are competing for the same grant. I must confess that I've not witnessed that in CC. Our board members are not involved. They don't have they're not board members in other organizations that were competing for the same grant. But however, from my knowledge and of interacting with them, in such cases, they will rather push for collaboration within those organizations that they are that they are board members, rather than trying to compete. That's my observation from the way they've been operating. Thank you.
Thank you, Chukwuka. Thank you, Jorge. I have a short question, then I'll open it up to everybody else. Have you identified any new funders from this process? After going through the listing and the prioritization and weighting, did you identify any funders that you had not been paying too much attention to, and you've decided to pay attention to now?
Yes, absolutely. So we used to pay more attention to the funders that we were previously, that we were previously worked with, and monitor their calls. But this exercise, by the time we intersected the areas of interest, the size of the grant, and develop all those indicators, other funders came up high in the list, such as USAID. We now realize that there's a lot of intersection with the work we do, and the size of grants, and even knowledge of relationship with our board members. So they came high on the list. So that was quite a surprising outcome of this strategy.
Okay, thank you. And Sebastian, you had a question for Chuka. Do you want to ask it yourself?
I think Sebastian had a question on an example of a change from the output-based strategy to the issue-based strategy. So what we are applying before, what I call the output-based, is we have our core areas that we work on, and we have a work plan of the reports and the publications that we want to produce based on our based on our work plan, and also the project funding that we get that drive also the research agenda. So that was the driver. The outputs that were produced from that was driving our research, was driving our policy engagement, and was driving our our communications and dissemination strategy. But now the issue based is that it's not. The output based is more supply oriented. It's, hey, this is what we've decided to bring out to the space, But the issue based is the other way around. Is more on the demand driven side. So that, hey, this is the issue, in the policy space that is, really generating some that's really topical. So what do? We have to produce outputs that we speak to that issue, that will provide some insight on that issue. And the type of issue it is will determine the kind of research outputs that we produce. Is it an opinion piece that will speak to this better, or would it be a podcast or animated video or infographics that will speak to this, or even a dialogue, So, and that also affected the communication tools, the websites, rather than uploading working papers here and there and projecting our research areas. The issue, the output that responds to the issue is what is projected on the website. So there is, if what we project changes more frequently because issues change frequently. So that is the issue-based approach that we implemented here.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from anybody else? Santiago Cueto had a question about whether you had any information of research or theory that would be applied to NGOs and research centers in the developing world. Did you consult any literature on these issues? Have you come across any interesting literature? Maybe Julie also might be able to answer that question, and we'll be sharing some links through the chat right now.
To be honest, this was I did some review of the problems, to motivate the article, just to understand the challenges. But in terms of this methodology and the procedure, it's entirely my thinking, actually. It's completely something developed, from my personal experience, and and my colleagues that how do we weight this, and we said, hey, this is how to apply this, but it's just an idea that wasn't quite informed by literature. This is very specific to our organization.
Sorry, I was muted. Julie, have you come across any research on fundraising for NGOs and policy research centers at the TTI?
Hi, Enrique. I'm not familiar with anything that's too current, but there's quite a bit of reflection and learning that's coming out of the TTI work with organizations like CSEA in Africa, as well as I think with a number of think tanks in Latin America. So I think that what we are going to probably be doing is publishing some of those reflections from these organizations on the TTI website, which we can probably cross-post on think tanks as well. But in terms of literature that we've been drawing upon, nothing comes to mind immediately. Of course, there's a lot of literature that's informed the work that Anthony Boateng has been doing with the accompanying the organizations in Africa, more aligned with things like strategic costing and other dimensions of business models, as opposed to resource mobilization and fundraising in particular. But maybe as we see things emerge, we can share those with the group.
Great. I've been sharing some links as well, and I think one of the things we found very interesting is that a lot of the theory, of course, is from the point of view of the funder. There's quite a bit about looking at foundations and how they grant and how they provide funding. But and there's a lot of research on the subject, and I've shared some links that link to those resources. And what I find interesting about this approach that CC is developing is that it's trying to get insights into their funders. And some of these resources do exactly that. They provide insights into what funders are thinking about, and that's a very good way of approaching there. Jorge, you want to have a last question? Yes, of course.
I'm just curious, and the presentation say that sometimes the donors needs more evidence, okay, for the research. But on the other hand, the policymaker are requesting less evidence and less deep into the research. How can we manage those viewpoints?
Okay. So the that point, I think it's trying to point out that that within the donor community and also the policy space, there are varying interests and values, and donors are more inclined towards demanding for evidence, and while policymakers, particularly in this region, in Nigeria, they are more inclined to using ideologies and political economy factors to make decisions. So it's about knowing how to synchronize, to align these interests together, to the benefit of the think tank. To know how do you align the evidence demanded by the donors to fit the ultimate users, which are the policymakers. So that's the point that I was trying to present there. I hope I have clarified that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We're coming up to an hour. Just make sure everybody who had a question wants to ask it, or anybody who had a comment, of course, wants to share it. And if you have any examples of alternative approaches to fundraising that you might want to share, please do, of course. And if there are none, then I would like to thank Chuka, Julie, and Jorge for joining us, and remind you that there are 2 more webinars on this series. On the 26th of June at about the same time. You can find this in the On Think Tanks website, but we'll let you know as well. There is a webinar on crowdfunding for think tanks. SADES, a think tank in El Salvador, has partnered with an organization in the US called HipGive, which is Hispanic Giving, who will probably have a lot of research on the subject of philanthropy in Latin America. And MediaTank, who are a filmmaking firm, and they did a series of videos for On Think Tanks TV, and they're launching a campaign on the HipGive, which is a crowdfunding platform targeted at the Latin American or the Hispanic community in the US and in the Americas. Which are an interesting idea, because it means that think tanks in Latin America, and something similar must exist in Africa or Asia, think tanks in Latin America could reach out to a Latin American diaspora or a Hispanic community who is more used to funding research or funding think tanks than probably our peers here in Lima or in La Paz or in Quito. So that's on the 26th. They'll be giving us insights about how to use crowdfunding for policy research, and then there will be another event looking at capacity building led by CSEA on the 4th of July. And we'll be sharing more information about that on Think Tanks and through the ILAIB and TTI networks. So if you want to join us for those, you can sign up. So that is all from us. Again, thank you very much. You will find in the chat box links to the document that describes the strategy that Chuka presented, and also an interview that we did with Chuka in April. I'll also send out an email with the link to this presentation, and we'll be sharing it on Twitter and our networks in the next few days, so you will be able to watch the video again if you missed anything, or if you want to share it with anybody else. So that's all from us, and thank you very much, Chuka, Jorge, Julie, and all of you who joined us.
Thank you very much, Enrique.
Bye.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much for organizing. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.